Newsflash, reparative therapy is legal for adults, and it should be legal for children and adolescents as well. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. In America, since 2012, over 20 states and multiple municipalities have banned what they call conversion therapy. But these bans are actually just for minors. Yes, in some cases, they're also for vulnerable adults, adults with, say, intellectual disabilities that can't make decisions for themselves. But the reality is they're limited to minors. But I can't tell you how many times I come across people, even people who are in support of what I do, who think that, oh, what you do is illegal. Like, just offering therapy to adults with unwanted same-sex attraction is illegal as well. And so that really shows the power of these bans to put a chilling effect on everyone. Everyone is scared now to do anything that could be remotely perceived as conversion therapy, the boogeyman. But the reality is, even the bans for adolescents, for minors, is unconstitutional and unjust. But so many people have been scared to make the argument that it shouldn't be blocked for children as well. And so that's why so many states have gotten away with banning it for minors. But it's not going to end there. That was never their goal, just to keep it so that children can't get this sort of therapy or adolescents can't get this sort of therapy. They want to ultimately make it so no one can get this therapy. Hence why you see some countries outside the US who have banned it outright for anyone, children or adults, like Canada, Victoria, Australia, I think also now New South Wales, Australia, France, I think Germany as well, the UK. They have their memorandum of understanding. So you can't be a registered therapist if you offer some form of sexual attraction fluidity exploration and therapy, or soci therapy, sexual orientation change efforts, or anything they consider gender exploring therapy, change exploring therapy for LGBT issues, in other words. So these other countries are just outright banning it. Brazil, I think, as well. So they're ahead of us on this. But that's the goal. Do not be mistaken. The goal of the LGBT activists is not just to keep it so children can't get this sort of therapy. They want it so that no one can get it. It's just easier to block it for children because they're making the case that it's harmful or potentially harmful for children, or it's coercive. And so only people who are able to give full consent should be able to do therapy for this issue. And yet notice they never make that same argument when it comes to gender affirming care, like puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones or breast amputation, or who knows what else comes with gender affirming care, social transition. They always make sure in the newer bans they have an exclusion clause that the bans against conversion therapy do not include changes that can be made to one's body and physiology if it's gender affirming, if it's affirming one's gender identity. No. We can ban just talking about your same-sex attraction or gender identity confusion, something totally non-invasive, but how dare you try to block children from being able to stop themselves from getting puberty or taking the wrong hormones? Complete double standard. So don't for a second think that this is about protecting children who can't consent to some sort of therapy that could potentially be dangerous. It's not. Because they won't hesitate for a moment to prescribe puberty blockers or gender transition or surgical amputation of breasts, healthy body parts, cross-sex hormones. Yeah, they do not care one bit about the long-term effects of all those procedures. So it's not about whether or not kids can consent. They're pushing one agenda, and it's LGBTQ plus affirmative. They want as many children as they can identifying as LGBTQ. Now, they'll try to go after the adults as well, but they know it's way easier to go after children. That's why we're seeing all the LGBTQ messaging in schools. It's not about helping kids feel safe to come out. It's about recruiting more. Anyway, that's a side tangent for another video. But I'm so happy this week the United States Supreme Court is hearing arguments from the Alliance Defending Freedom taking up Kaley Chiles' case against Colorado's conversion therapy ban. And so this is what we've been asking for. We've been fighting for this for over 10 years. My colleagues and I in the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity, our current president, David Pickup, he was the plaintiff against California and the first therapy ban there in 2012. Pickup versus Brown. But the United States Supreme Court has not heard our arguments, but they've been needing to for a while, because what we got currently is a split circuit court decision. One circuit court in the southeast, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, ruled that the ban against therapy for minors there with LGBT issues or gender identity and same-sex attraction was unconstitutional, that it violated the free speech rights of both the therapist and the client. But then you got a circuit court up in the Northwest where they ruled that their ban was constitutional, or at least they ruled in favor of the ban. And so with this split circuit court, we've been needing the United States Supreme Court to weigh in. And so finally they are. So with this case coming up this week, and then with the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice Conference coming up this week as well in Houston, I'm preparing for my workshop for there, and I came across this article. And the title really jumped out at me. It read, "Reparative Therapy is legal for adults." And at first when I saw that part, I was like, oh, finally, someone is admitting it. Because I can't tell you how many people who, when they hear that there's these bans for so-called conversion therapy or reparative therapy for minors, they assume that it's illegal for adults as well. That it's illegal across the board in every state, when it's only about 20-something, sure, maybe a little less than half the states. But everyone seems to think that it's illegal for any child anywhere, but not just for children. They seem to believe that it's for adults as well, the bans. So I saw this article by the Harvard Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review stating the truth, that reparative therapy is legal for adults. But then there's a second sentence in the title. Here's why it shouldn't be. And right there, you can see what the agenda is. It's not about protecting children. It's not about, oh, well, this is potentially harmful and coercive, and so we don't want children to be coerced, and so they can't give consent to this sort of therapy. It's not about that. They want it to be illegal for everyone. They just know that they can get people to believe the lies about therapy for unwanted same-sex attraction and gender identity if we're talking about it for minors. Because if they can present it as somewhat harmful in any way, then if our protective instinct, our care instinct will get activated, and we'll want to protect children from that. But we have also a bit of a libertarian instinct in the United States that says, well, children shouldn't be doing things that are dangerous, but adults should have the right to do whatever they want. If they want to take something that's potentially dangerous and they want to do it for themselves, let them go right ahead. So that's sort of the mentality that we have in the U.S. that's kept it so that their efforts have been limited to banning therapy for minors. But we're getting a new generation who wants to extend adolescence well into adulthood and wants to claim that they are neurodiverse and that they're like unable to handle harmful words or mean words, or that they're the most mentally ill generation. You can see how they're taking the same arguments that are applied to children and wanting to apply them now to adults as well. So let's just briefly go over this article here, that if I were to go into it in depth, I could tear it to shreds because it's so poorly written and researched. I don't even know who the author is. They just give credit to whoever took the photo that the article comes with. It's written back in 2020, and one of the things that was kind of relevant at the time was during President Trump's first campaign, Vice President candidate Mike Pence talked about how he was supportive of people obtaining what he called reparative therapy. And so everyone wanted to make a big deal about that on the left. The article reads, quote, most Americans have probably at least heard of conversion therapy, a broad term encompassing various dangerous practices aimed at changing the gender identity or sexual orientation of an individual. Unquote. Let's stop right there. You know what? I really would not mind being called a conversion therapist if the term was just more objective. It was just simply a term used for therapy to help explore the potential for change in sexual attractions and gender identity, or gender identity confusion. If they just use more objective, neutral terminology. But notice they always have to put some adjectives in there. Dangerous, discredited, pseudoscientific. So they're telling you already in advance what the conclusion is, that I'm doing something that's innately dangerous. When I counsel someone coming to me with unwanted same-sex attraction, whatever intervention I'm using is innately dangerous. So everything I'm doing is dangerous. So it's not that I'm just doing therapy and that maybe there are some techniques within therapy in general that could be dangerous and I may or may not use those dangerous techniques. No, it's saying any therapy for so-called sexual orientation or gender identity is dangerous. So this is exactly what I was talking about in my previous video about the conversion therapy psyop. That the people running the agenda, the psychological institutions, the academia, the media, government wants you to believe that any form of therapy to explore change in same-sex attraction is innately dangerous, therefore justifying them taking away your rights and paving the way for a whole generation to be indoctrinated in LGBTQ and recruited into LGBTQ. Obviously, that's what's happening. Once you remove therapy options, then if you got tons of programming, messaging in social media, in movies, TV, music, promoting LGBTQ, then you're going to get a generation of children who are confused about what gender they are, about who they're attracted to, and if they express any concerns about that, they go to their parents. Parents are going to go to a therapist, and they're going to tell them, oh yeah, we can do therapy for that, and it's only going to be one type, LGBTQ affirmative, because there's no other options now. There's no exploring the same-sex attraction in a more curious manner to figure out, well, what could be beneath that? And what are your values? I mean, you might be feeling these feelings, but what do you want to do with them? Do you actually want to act on these, or do you want to learn strategies for not acting on them, for potentially exploring change in them? Nope, not an option. Not an option. When you remove the competition, then the stage is clear for you to just enact one agenda, one worldview. And so the LGBT activists impose their worldview on their clients. And that's another change we've seen in the therapy world. Therapists are being trained to become activists, not real therapists. They have no depth in their understanding when it comes to psychodynamics anymore. So, right there, right off the bat, you see the messaging is already determined for you how you should view any sort of therapy. It's dangerous just by being a therapy to explore change in sexual orientation or gender identity. And as their so-called proof, the article continues, quote, these practices have historically included everything from hypnosis to electroconvulsive shock therapy to behavioral correction, many of which are still used today. Unquote. Like, I'm barely going to be able to get through this. I'm barely going to be able to get through this article here. Hypnosis, I don't know a single therapist using hypnosis. Now, hypnotherapy is used for a variety of things. Unwanted conditions like smoking and gambling addiction. So I have no problem if someone did use hypnosis. I just can't say that this is something many people use. I don't know a single hypnotherapist in my field. Electroconvulsive shock therapy? That hasn't been done since the 60s, back when they're using shock therapy for everything. any sort of unwanted impulse or feeling, they're using it for a wide range of things, not just same-sex attraction. But no one has been using shock treatment or aversive therapy for same-sex attraction since 60s, 70s, maybe a few people in the 80s. That's it. It's been well over 40 years since anyone has done this sort of treatment. So to say that many of which are still used today, well, give me some stats. How many are using these sort of techniques? No, many is just a vague number. It's a meaningless word. All right, continuing. I'll see how much I can get through this article. It's every little sentence triggers me here. Quote, conversion therapy has been a widely discussed topic in recent years, whether that's because Vice President Mike Pence has debatably come out in support of it, or because numerous survivors have come forward to speak about it, the abuse they suffered because of it. Unquote. Let's pause right there. Numerous survivors? Let's click. They got a link here. What does this bring us to? Uh-oh. Brings us to nothing. So, whatever it was bringing us to is no longer there. Okay. Speak of the abuse they suffered. What's this abuse? Oh, a Huffington Post article. A survivor of gay conversion therapy shares his chilling story from 2016. So, a lot of the same stuff about Mike Pence. Let's keep reading here. Let's just take a look real quick. TC, a 19-year-old gay man who spoke to the Huffington Post anonymously for this article in order to protect his safety, is a survivor of conversion therapy practices. Alright, so let's see what this anonymous guy had to say. TC was subjected to conversion therapy in 2012 when he was 15 years old after his parents discovered he was gay. The conversion therapy practices took place in the basement of a church after school hours and were explained to TC and his parents as having two separate components. He told the Huffington Post, the first step, which usually lasted 6 months, is where they deconstruct us as a person. He puts that in quotes, so it sounds like they actually told him and his parents that this is what they're going to do. They're going to deconstruct him as a person. Their tactics still haunt me. Aversion therapy, shock therapy, harassment, and occasional physical abuse. Their goal was to get us to hate ourselves for being LGBTQ. Most of us were gay, but the entire spectrum was represented. So this apparently in a group setting. And they knew what they were doing. Okay. The second step of the program, they, quote, rebuilt us in their image, unquote. So is that their own words as well? So they literally told them in the informed consent process that we're going to deconstruct you as a person and then rebuild you in our image. I don't know anyone who would be crazy enough to sign off on that. Say, yeah, that sounds like a good program. I'll let my son go to this program. You're going to deconstruct him as a person and then rebuild him in your image. Putting the scare quotes around that makes it sound like that's what they actually said. They removed us of everything that made us a unique person and instead made us a walking, talking robot for Jesus. They retaught us everything we knew, how to eat, talk, walk, dress, believe, even breathe. We were no longer people at the end of the program. TC said that the conversion therapy sessions would take place every weekday, with shock therapy treatments lasting approximately an hour and aversion therapy lasting 3. So about 4 hours of shock therapy in this setting would be aversion itself. So what, they're going to do 4 hours every day, every weekday after school. Uh-huh. Right. You smell that? I smell something. Poop! If you believe this story, I got some beachfront property in Arizona to sell you. This is the most unbelievable story. If this actually happened, why not name the perpetrators of this sort of abuse? A church basement. Well, one, what does it have to do with therapy? Because clearly this wasn't being done by any sort of licensed therapist, if it's done at all. So it sounds like if it actually happened, which I highly doubt, It was done by some backwoods, like, crazy fringe church group. But yet, I doubt they did, because who's going to have equipment to do electroshock therapy? Not just anyone can go and buy that. You need to be a medical professional to have electroconvulsive therapy equipment. So give me a break. There's no way someone in 2012, if he was telling me this happened in a state hospital in 1950, I'd believe him, because that's when they were doing this sort of stuff in secular therapy for homosexuality. But to tell me that this was going on in 2012, nah. You're out of your mind if you think this is true. TC said multiple minors involved in his program ultimately took their own lives. They were able to turn us against ourselves, he said. This is what drew so many people to suicide. We all shared a sense of loathing towards who we were and who we loved. It wasn't just your regular I hate myself. It was a disgust with the person you were, and you wanted to do anything you could to change. Watching people disappear just became a fact of life after a while. You got used to it. Yeah, this sounds entirely fictional. It says TC escaped conversion therapy by feigning complete rehabilitation after returning to his hometown from a previously planned religious mission trip. Today, he attends a religious university and still identifies as gay privately, a secret from his family who thinks the conversion therapy worked. Yeah, well, I don't think your story's true. And if you want to come forward publicly and tell me so, happily I'll listen to your story. But you better name the people who did this, because if it's just some unnamed mysterious group, then I'm calling bullcrap. But right there, you got a good example. This is the stuff that we have to put up with as professional therapists in this field. We have to endure being slandered and lied about and being blamed for something that, if it happened at all, did not happen in a professional therapy setting. So what does this have to do with actual professional therapy for exploring changes in unwanted same-sex attraction or gender identity confusion? It says nothing about it. There's no relevance. Okay, back to the Harvard Law article. Research has shown that not only is conversion therapy almost always unsuccessful, but it also causes immeasurable harms to those who are forced to undergo it. All right? Unsuccessful. Another hyperlink. Let me guess. It's probably going to be the 2009 APA Task Force report. Let's check. Oh, what did I say? Yeah. American Psychological Association. The report of the APA Task Force on Appropriate Therapeutic Responses to Sexual Orientation. The irony of them putting this in here as their proof that it's always unsuccessful. I'm going to have to do a whole video on the problems with this APA Task Force report. I've already talked about it in my previous series that I did on conversion therapy myths and misunderstandings, where I talk about how the APA Task Force report, which was the basis for the first SOCI ban for minors back in 2012 in California, admitted that there is no data, or at least to them, there are no studies of sufficient rigor. To them, there were plenty of other studies done that they just chose not to look at or include in their study, their so-called report. But according to them, there are no studies of sufficient rigor on current-day forms of SOCI, sexual orientation change efforts. Therefore, they concluded in that report itself that there's not enough data to determine whether or not current forms of SOCI are harmful or beneficial, effective or ineffective. So all their recommendations that they made at the end of their whole massive study that they were supposed to have been doing was based off research on the old behavioral approaches used back in the 60s that did use aversive techniques that might have helped people change behavior for a short period of time, but just like any psychoanalyst would have told you, weren't going to help resolve the main issue, and so it didn't have good long-term effects. In fact, it did cause some degree of harms. Some benefit. Actually, there were some benefits, but also harm. So that was the data they had. They're using old studies that don't reflect anything about what is done today. No one uses aversive techniques in professional therapy for same-sex attraction or gender identity. So you can't base any conclusions on modern forms of therapy for sexuality and gender off those old studies. But that's what they did because they refused to look at other studies because they showed things more favorable for change allowing therapies. There are so many problems with that task force. The task force itself was completely biased. There were therapists and psychologists who applied to be part of it. They were nominated to be part of this task force, like Joseph Nicolosi Sr. and Mark Yarhouse, even, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but he at least would have been a little more nuanced, I imagine. No therapist who was at least a bit critical of LGBTQ was allowed. All of the, I keep saying therapists, psychologists, all of the psychologists that are part of this task force were either gay identified or they were well-known LGBTQ activists. And most damning of all, they admit on page 72 there is a lack of published research on SOCI among children. And pretty much no research. They had no studies, they cited, showing the effectiveness or potential for harm on SOCI among minors. And yet, this task force report was considered the definitive answer to whether or not therapy should be banned for minors. And right there, the fact that there were no studies to even show if it was effective or not, and yet this was used as a basis to pass the first SOCI ban, should show you the SOCI bans were never about protecting children, because there's no proof that children are being harmed by any such sort of therapies. You have no published reports, no studies, there's nothing in the literature showing children being harmed by so-called conversion therapy. And yet, parental rights are being violated. Children and minors, adolescents, who actually do want therapy to explore change in their sexual attractions and resolve issues with their gender identity and their gender dysphoria, are being denied their rights to get the therapy that matches their values and their goals because of an LGBTQ agenda being forced upon them. And the article continues, but it also causes immeasurable harms. So what study are they citing there for harms? Well, let's find out. Seriously, this is just a white paper by Pan American Health Organization, a branch of the World Health Organization. This is not a research study. This is simply propaganda. That's going to be their definitive evidence that it causes immeasurable harms? Give me a break. All right, let's try to get through this article here. Today, national health associations agree that conversion therapy is at best ineffective and at worst harmful to those who experience it. Because of that, many states have banned conversion therapy from being performed on children under 18 years old. Like I've been saying, no, it's not because of that. It's not because it actually causes immeasurable harms and it's ineffective. It's because it does not fit the agenda. And then this next line is hilarious to me. Quote, but what most people probably don't know is that conversion therapy is still alive and well in the United States, masquerading under a different name, reparative therapy, unquote. Masquerading? The term reparative therapy goes back to the early 90s, predates the whole term conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a new term being imposed on us who practice just good, change-allowing, change-exploring therapy for people with sexuality and gender conflicts. In particular, reparative therapy was a specific form of therapy developed by Joseph Nicolosi Sr. You can read Shame and Attachment Loss, the practical work of reparative therapy, to find out exactly what were the procedures being done in authentic reparative therapy. The problem is that everyone was using the term reparative therapy synonymously with any form of therapy or any sort of change effort which can expand beyond therapy itself. So the term conversion therapy became equated with reparative therapy, and that simply is unfair. reparative therapy was a specific approach developed by the one psychologist who has seen and treated the most people of same-sex attraction ever. He worked with thousands of clients, and he reported a wide range of outcomes. Once you see thousands of clients, you're going to see trends. So he probably didn't do much real scientific data with what he would report on the outcomes, but I give him a little leeway if he wants to say, round things off a bit. But what Nicholas Sr. would often say is the outcomes he would witness is a third, no real benefit, no real harm done, just no real significant change. 1/3 significant change in their sexual attractions, and 1/3 complete change, meaning no more same-sex attraction, and they're now experiencing opposite sex attraction. I would say presumably toward one particular person, maybe not a general globalized attraction to the opposite sex. Now, it's not scientific data, it's just his summary of what he would witness as a clinician treating thousands of clients, particularly men. Well, if someone treated thousands of people in any particular issue, I'm going to listen to what they say, and not just the naysayers who haven't actually done the work. So I take the accuracy of that summary with a bit of a grain of salt, but also I appreciate that he wasn't saying, oh, do this therapy and you will definitely be cured. Everyone likes to say, oh, he offered a gay cure, and if you do this program, you follow this formula, you'll be radically changed from exclusively homosexual in your attractions to exclusively heterosexual. He never said that. He was always pretty modest in his claims about the degree of change to expect. Even people who experience significant change, they still have some degree of same-sex attraction. It was still considered a success for the client if at least the attractions were not as intense, maybe not as pervasive. They were able to live the life they wanted to live, maybe have increased attraction toward their spouse, to pursue a relationship with someone of the opposite sex and start a family, experience a natural marriage. Like, sure, they might have some same-sex attraction that comes up periodically. Like, they could live with that. They were fine with that. Still success for them. They're having an increased quality of life. They worked through trauma. All right? The other irony of this whole article is they use the term reparative therapy when this article was written in 2020. Well, Joseph Nicolosi Sr. had passed away in 2017. And when he did, his son, Joseph Nicolosi Jr., trademarked the name reparative therapy and retired it because of the fact that so many people have been dragging the name reparative therapy through the mud, confusing it with all these abusive forms of so-called conversion therapy. And so it really lost its distinctives. And so then he introduced the term reintegrative therapy, which is a little bit different in some ways in that it's not just for treating unwanted same-sex attraction, but for any trauma or addiction. But we find that, of course, it can be applied for those with same-sex attraction, sexual addiction issues, fetishes, other compulsive issues like binge eating, other behavioral and process addictions. And so, of course, we get a lot of clients coming out to do reintegrative therapy to explore their potential for change in sexuality. And they should have that right. So I would say if you're going to talk about reparative therapy, be more specific, but they're going to use the term pretty broadly. So let's just see what they mean when they use the term reparative therapy. The article continues, quote, reparative therapy is a form of conversion therapy provided to adults who voluntarily seek to change their sexual orientation or gender identity, usually out of a desire to live their lives in accordance with their religious or political beliefs. I don't know about political. No one cares about politics when it comes to their sexuality. Proponents of reparative therapy attempt to distance it from conversion therapy by arguing that the practice is not harmful because it does not involve client shaming or shock treatments. Correct. But rather consists of client discussions and behavioral modification. Now hold up. Unquote, sorry. If we're talking about authentic reparative therapy by Joseph Nicolosi Sr., it's the least behavioral approach. His approach was psychodynamic, emotion-focused, trauma-informed. Okay, it started off as just good old-fashioned psychoanalysis, but he learned that his clients need a more relational approach, so it became more relationally psychodynamic, and then more emotion-focused, using intense body work to help clients get in touch with their feelings in their body, and then reprocess their emotions, their memories, and then he started incorporating trauma reprocessing techniques like EMDR. None of EMDR is not a behavioral approach. Trauma reprocessing is not behavioral. These are more approaches to do memory reconsolidation, to get to the root issue. And that's essentially what we do in reintegrative therapy as well. So if this article is talking about authentic reparative therapy, they're way off when they're talking about behavioral management or modification. Now, there are therapists who do some form of SOCI, or those of us in the field, we also try to use the term safety, sexual attraction fluidity exploration in therapy, which can include a wide range of mainstream therapy approaches, like psychodrama, narrative therapy, CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, yes, I know some CBT therapists who would do more behavioral modification, but they would not be considered reparative therapists. At least not, those from Nicolosi's camp. Anyway, the article continues. Reparative therapists market their practice as a voluntary experience where the client who does not identify with their homosexual urges comes to them wishing to no longer be LGBTQ+. That bothers me because if they don't identify with their homosexual urges, then they don't already identify as LGBTQ. So to no longer be, all right, you're confusing feeling something with being something. So use terminology that's consistent with how the clients would present. They're not coming to us to not be LGBTQ. They're coming to us to help work on managing feelings, learn what's underneath the emotions, their arousal templates, work on reprocessing, trauma, work on developmental wounds and deficits, learn better ways of meeting their needs in healthy ways. Like, that's what they're coming for, not to stop being something. If anything, at the core, what we're helping clients do is embrace the reality of who they are. As men who come to us, helping them feel like authentically one of the men, a guy among guys. For women, getting in touch with her true femininity, just by accepting even the ways in which she's different from other women, and still saying that doesn't change who she is, what she is. Same thing with guys. You don't have to become a macho man to become confident and secure in your masculinity. So right there, I'm cutting off at the pass some of the criticisms they're going to present in the next paragraph or two. Anyway, they continue, at which time the petitioner and client set goals to get the client on a path to heterosexuality or cisgender identity. Not the way I would word it, but for the most part, a lot of what they said in that paragraph is accurate. Yeah. We are not shaming clients. We're not using aversive techniques or shock treatments. I don't know anyone in all the years I've been doing this work, since 2006, who does any sort of shock treatments or behavioral management or aversive techniques. Okay, they're relying on outdated data to scare the public and intimidate people from actually using good psychotherapy to explore change in sexuality and gender identity. But yeah, everything we do is completely voluntary. It goes without saying. Even if we're working with minors, it's voluntary. You think we go and force a child to talk? You try to get any adolescent child to talk in therapy. You clearly don't know a thing about working with adolescents. You don't force them to do squat. So when we do get clients who are adolescents and they're there at their parents' behest, like, we work on what that client wants. If they don't want to work on sexuality, guess what? We're not working on it. We're working on other issues. Maybe we're doing family counseling, helping the parents learn how to communicate and listen to their child better, and not be punitive to them, but actually meet their emotional needs in healthy ways. Oh, that's so terrible, isn't it? But despite that pretty accurate description of what actually happens in authentic reparative therapy or authentic safety or ethical sociotherapy. The article continues with saying, this is false advertising. In 2007, the American Psychological Association conducted a comprehensive study of various methods that are used to change sexual orientation and gender identity. 2007. They're just referring to the same APA task force report. So they started in 2007, published their findings or their conclusions in 2009. Article says that reparative therapy was among the practices investigated. No, it really wasn't. Okay, you wouldn't even allow the founder of reparative therapy in your task force. You outright rejected one of the major studies, a meta-analysis that Dr. Nicolosi and Dean Bird did that showed an analysis of a ton of different studies on outcomes of clients doing therapy for same-sex attraction. So, no, you did not actually study or investigate reparative therapy, if by reparative therapy you mean Nicolosi's approach. And if you're using the term broadly to include the behaviorist techniques from the 60s that used aversive techniques, that's not fair, that's inaccurate. The APA ultimately concluded that reparative therapy, like other forms of conversion therapy, does not work. People who undergo reparative therapy are taught to behave in accordance with a straight identity, a practice that may sometimes change behaviors but doesn't actually change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. See, that sounds like they're referring to the behaviorist techniques. All right, a lot of this is just conflating authentic reparative therapy, ethical therapy for exploring change in sexuality, with outdated and disproven behaviorist techniques that no one has used in decades. Okay, this last sentence is rich. Often people who undergo reparative therapy ultimately require actual therapy to undo the damage. But the article there really doesn't show what the actual therapy is, but I have a hunch they're just talking about gay affirmative therapy, because that's pretty much what they conclude at the end of this whole article. All right, let's continue with this article. It's this terrible article. Quote, the harms of reparative therapy extend well beyond those committed against patients who are deceived into thinking the practice is successful. All right, unquote. All right. So that's their dismissal of people who do say that the therapy has been helpful for them, because you can't deny that there are studies that show people saying, I did therapy for working on my same-sex attraction and it helped me. No, they're just saying, well, anyone who reports that it benefited them, they're deceived into thinking the practice is successful. That's crazy. And you want to put this in Harvard? Is this a law journal? This is what you're basing arguments on? That's crazy. Keeps going. Reparative therapy has many negative implications for the LGBTQ plus community and for society as a whole. Wow. For one thing, reparative therapy is based in large part on toxic masculinity. Male clients with homosexual urges are told they need to reconnect with their masculinity or learn how to become manly again. Rhetoric that defines the worth of men based on traditionally masculine traits. All right, let's pause right there. Is telling men to connect with their own masculinity toxic? That's actually quite encouraging to guys. When I'm working with so many guys who think they're not really a true man because they have SSA. And the main thing I'm trying to help them do is understand you are not categorically different from other men. You belong in the world of men. And you're telling me that that's toxic? That's ridiculous. The same is true for queer women and people who are questioning their gender identity as well. They are taught to behave in accordance with traits that are stereotypically associated with femininity, or with whatever gender the person was assigned at birth. Whatever gender they were assigned at birth, like it's so arbitrary. Reparative therapy thus reinforces stereotypical gender norms, which in turn contributes to negative views and treatment of LGBTQ plus people who do not conform to these stereotypes. That's a bunch of conjecture and a bunch of made-up stuff. Notice I never include quotes from the actual practitioners You don't see quotes in context, let alone at all, of Nicolosi or therapists like myself, like Joe Nicolosi Jr., like David Pickup, Mike Davidson, uh, some of those who are most public and out there. You don't see quotes from us, from our articles, from our videos, actually explaining what we do. No, it's you have to get it all secondhand. That's why they ban our videos. That's why they take out our platforms. So that way, the only way you can hear about what we do is through secondary sources who are giving you their version of what we do. Keep going here. More fundamentally, the very existence of reparative therapy implies that being a member of the LGBTQ plus community means a person is broken and needs fixing. It implies that LGBTQ plus people have a mental disorder that needs to be cured. All right, I'm just going to skip the rest of that paragraph, but that first part is just ridiculous. Just the very existence of there being a treatment approach that aligns with the values of those who do not want to identify as LGBTQ. That just the existence itself of therapeutic choice is an affront to the LGBTQ plus community. What about the non-LGBTQ community who experience same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, but they don't want to identify as LGBTQ plus? Don't they have the right to a therapy that assists them with their goals and honors their values, that honors their worldview? No? Should they be forced into your worldview? Well, like I made the case in my previous video on truly multicultural counseling for people with unwanted same-sex attraction and gender identity confusion, the LGBT activists are not multicultural. To think that just the existence of a therapy option is a threat. You don't have to do it. Guess what? If you don't want reparative therapy, you don't need to do it. That's what informed consent is for. You know what you're getting into. And the name, too. They're going to capitalize on the name reparative therapy, which is one of the big misunderstandings about reparative therapy. Nicolosi was very clear about this. The word reparative is not referring to the people being broken and therefore the therapy is fixing them. It's referring to the reparative drive theory developed by Elizabeth Moberly, saying that the same-sex attraction itself, especially among men, is reparative in its function. That we have our men who have a perceived, really deeply held doubt and insecurity about their gender, their belonging among their gender. And so the same-sex attraction wells up as a way to repair that unmet need for same-sex affiliation, affirmation, acceptance, approval, attachment. So it's reparative in that function. And so reparative therapy is about understanding what's beneath that drive, what's beneath the tendency toward eroticizing the same sex, and therefore meeting those underlying needs. That's all that reparative therapy is referring to. It's not saying that because you have SSA, you're broken and we're fixing you, we're curing you. That wasn't Nicolosi's language. All right, just another paragraph about how all these professional organizations are condemning reparative therapy. And then there's this sentence. The United States should follow the lead of these professional mental health organizations and prohibit reparative therapy from being practiced, even on adults who seek it out voluntarily. Unquote. Right there. You know, all the people think, well, we should allow them to ban it for minors because, you know, a minor doesn't really know what they're getting into when they sign up for this sort of therapy. And so, yeah, we should protect them from this because there's a potential for harm. First off, if you're going to use that sort of argument, then you should not allow minors to go to therapy for anything then. I used to work in the intake department for the largest multi-site counseling practice in Pennsylvania. I have spoken to thousands of callers calling in to set up for appointments. And I've spoken to hundreds of parents calling to schedule appointments for their children, especially their teenage children, who do not want to come to counseling. And guess what? The parents have a right to set them up for therapy. It's probably not going to go very well, though, if the actual teenager does not want to come to therapy, but the parents have a right to at least schedule it and see if it'll work out. I usually would advise against it, though. And so the same thing goes for LGBT issues. If your child is identified as LGBT, bringing them to therapy isn't going to be a magic cure. They want the help. And if they're resistant, guess what? There's very little I can do. I'm just going to work on whatever they want to work on, or I'm going to work on the family dynamics. But either way, you as the parent reserve the right for your child to get therapy that aligns with your values because you're the parent. So just because your child doesn't want to do it doesn't mean, okay, then you shouldn't have the right as a parent to get them therapy for whatever issue. I had so many of the people calling when I was working that job were parents trying to schedule their son because they saw that he was either playing video games too much or he's smoking pot, and he didn't see a problem with it, but they do, obviously. And so of course he's going to be resistant. And guess what? Therapy is not going to be easy. It's going to be slow, and therapists are going to have to take a lot of time joining with that client. But they're not there to be a proxy for the parents and just push the parents' agenda. They're going to have to work with that child or that adolescent to see what they want to work on and maybe get them in alignment with what the parents want in some way, or at least set up some good boundaries and maybe probe a bit, maybe challenge that child a bit to see, do some motivational interviewing skills. Okay? Therapists should be free to do that. It's not harmful to explore a topic with a client. But anyway, like I was saying, this whole idea that, oh, well, fine, let's ban it for doing this therapy on children. The same tactics they use, the same arguments they use to ban it for children are going to be used to ban it for adults. We should have never let it happen in the first place. And shame on the church for not speaking up louder, coming to defense of licensed therapists, because the church just thought, well, they're not coming after our churches, they're not coming after our ministries and our ability to preach. Well, that was short-sighted. So many churches across the world now can't offer pastoral care for people dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender identity confusion. In Australia, you will be fined or imprisoned even just for praying with someone struggling with their sexuality. So here in the United States, we have a bit of a separation of church and state that allows us the freedom as churches, but they're going to find a way, if we don't stop them at the therapy level, they're going to find a way to violate your rights as Christians or other religious people. Well, the article continues. People who practice reparative therapy argue that they are simply promoting what is morally acceptable within their religion, and that they are not forcing change upon anyone who does not already want to change. Yeah, correct. What's so wrong with that? They argue that reparative therapy is different from conversion therapy and should not be banned. Those who seek out reparative therapy for themselves claim that such a prohibition would unreasonably restrict their free will and their right to make voluntary choices about how to live their lives. And guess what? All of the mainstream mental health organizations like the APA and the ACA have as one of their ethical guidelines or principles, may not in the particular ethics code, but the overarching principles are included the client's right to self-determination or autonomy. I might use either term. So they know that banning therapy for clients is a violation of their right to self-determination. But what do they say in response to that? Clear contradiction? Quote, however, federal and state governments do have the authority to prohibit people from seeking out medical treatments that the government has reasonably deemed harmful or deceitful. For this reason, some states have prohibited all efforts to change the gender identity or sexual orientation of a person under 18, including reparative therapy sought voluntarily. So basically they're saying, yes, we know this is a violation of your autonomy, but we reserve the right to do so if we deem it harmful for you to explore change. That's why They have to push the harm myth that so-called conversion therapy is innately harmful. They're not going to parse it out. Yes, these techniques are not harmful and you can use these ones but not these techniques. No, because they want to ban it for everyone no matter what. It's not because, well, we studied every technique out there and found that these are the harmful ones. All right, and so therefore we think we should ban it in general. No. They already start with their agenda. We want to ban it. How do we do that? Because we know it's going to violate the client's right to autonomy. We have to prove it's harmful. That's the actual strategy. All right, let's skip to the second to last paragraph here. If reparative therapy were banned, there would still be plenty of options, really plenty of options, seriously, for adults who struggle with their sexual orientation or gender identity, most notably traditional therapy. Really, traditional therapy. What do you think we're doing in safety or sociotherapy or reparative therapy? We're using traditional therapy, mainstream therapy approaches, psychodynamic, psychodrama, narrative therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma reprocessing. All these are traditional therapy. So what do you mean by traditional therapy? Well, guess what? That's a euphemism for LGBTQ affirmative therapy. They just don't want to say it outright. But that's what they mean if you keep reading. Traditional therapy does not have a preconceived end goal in mind, but instead adapts to the needs of the clients. Well, isn't that what we've been doing in sociotherapy? We're not putting out an end goal that you, by the end of this, you will be completely converted from one sexual orientation to the other. Like I said, Nicholas even said, a third no change, a third significant change, a third complete change. Okay? So clearly he wasn't saying this is, you're going to have this goal met. In current day reintegrative therapy, we actually discourage clients from making their goal orientation change, but rather focusing on trauma reprocessing, on working on what they actually have a direct control over. And because we find that when they hyper focus on changing the sexual feelings, it interferes with the therapy process. So we want them to focus more on exploring with curiosity and compassion. Neither pro-LGBT nor anti-LGBT. So yes, we are adapting to the needs of the clients. We are creating healthier environments and a mindset. Because the LGBT affirmative therapist doesn't ask questions. They don't explore with curiosity what people are feeling and what may be beneath their attractions or their gender confusion. All right? They're just imposing a worldview on them and saying, oh, well, if you have these feelings, this must be what you are, not something that you experience. So who's really doing real professional therapy here? Traditional therapy. Well, here they give it away in this next sentence. Quote, unlike reparative therapy, traditional therapy has also been proven to be successful at helping individuals learn to accept sexual orientations or gender identities that were previously sources of struggle in their lives. There are also numerous support groups for people who struggle with their LGBTQ plus identity. You don't want to just come out right and say it. The plenty of options for people is simply LGBTQ plus affirmative therapies, getting them to accept their LGBTQ plus identity and go through the coming out continuum. And if you need help with it, we got an LGBTQ plus support group for you. So there we have it. That's the article by Harvard. I would expect a little bit better. Well, may not these days, I guess. But this just shows why it's so important for us to fight this psyop of conversion therapy, to fight the LGBTQ plus agenda that is taking away your rights as clients. I'm not here to fight for my right as a therapist. I only exist because there's a need that's out there that's not being served. I could do plenty of other forms of therapy. I can just work with people with trauma and sexual addiction issues. No, there are people who are not being served. People with same-sex attraction, with gender identity confusion, who do not want LGBTQ plus affirmative therapy. And they're being harmed by not getting the therapy that aligns with their values. And so that's why we need to fight these bans. And so pray that the Supreme Court will listen to the arguments this week and really consider protecting actual client rights and the constitutional rights of clients. But even if they don't, I put my faith in God. I don't put my faith in the Supreme Court. So he will be honored either way, even if they are coming after us just for providing good help for people. But pray for us. We're on the front lines here. So we're fighting this fight one way or the other. But I'm praying for a victory here. If you learn anything from this, please drop a comment, share, subscribe, hit the like button, please. Until next time, please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. Take care.